Hello everyone and welcome to, I think I was on mute there for a short period of time, so I apologise. Welcome to the webinar and welcome to session number 3. So sorry about the scratchy start. I hope everyone's had an opportunity to practice their skills, their influencing skills from the last workshop and had a bit of fun with that. Hope you've had a chance to observe other people in action and watch how they might influence people as well. I'm sure you've got some good stories to share, and I'd be more than happy to hear them on email offline. I also hope that you're continuing with your feedback, which was of course Unit 1, and so all of these things are accumulative so that you continue them and add to your kit bag as you go through the process. All right, so optimising team performance. I'm just going to turn off the webcam for the time being, just so that we can get back to the actual slides. And what I want to do now is talk about optimising team performance. And I would suggest to you that this is your primary role as a leader. I would suggest that your primary role as a leader is to get the very best out of each of the team members that you lead. And to me, that is the most critical role that you have. And what that basically means is that it's not about, say, taking people from, say, 20% to 100% overnight. That's not realistic. It's not going to happen. But what you should be aiming to do is to get small incremental improvements. We're talking 10% here or there. Essentially, that's what you're trying to do, and I'd like you to think about your leadership in that capacity. How do I actually get a little more out of each person? So if you think about it this way, if you were leading, say, let's just pick a round figure of 5 people. If you were leading 5 people and you could get a 10% improvement in their performance, and whatever that might mean, 10%, we're talking a 50% increase in your team, which is significant. So it's only small incremental changes. So the question really is, how do we get those changes? How do we actually get people to do better than what they'd normally do? Well, I'm going to cover 3 things in this particular broadcast today, Unit 3. I'm going to look at some of the barriers of conversations, and I think at the end of the day, I am really talking about having meaningful conversations with people. And there's obviously some barriers that I need to broach, and I'm going to look at 9 of those barriers and consider what they might be and consider what you might do about reducing or minimising those barriers. You might not get rid of them all, but what can you do to minimise them? We will also look at a framework that I put together called the 5 Conversations Framework. And the 5 Conversations Framework is a useful framework for you to start building performance up in your workplace. And then I'm going to look at 5 more developmental conversations. So essentially what I'm hoping that you'll get out of today's session is that you will be having more useful, meaningful conversations with the people that directly report to you. Because when it all comes down to it, that is the only way that you can really increase your the performance of your team members through conversations, one conversation at a time. And by conversation, of course, I'm not sitting around chatting about everything and anything. That's really talking about targeted conversations. So they're the 3 things that I'm hoping you'll get out of today's session. Okay. So let's look at some sobering statistics. I'm going to share with you some interesting statistics which really do highlight the need for you to have more meaningful conversations with the people that you lead. First statistic that might be interesting or is interesting is this, that 79% of organisations worldwide struggle to engage and retain their employees. That's a significant number, and we'll look at why that's the case shortly. Secondly, 86% of organisations believe they don't have an adequate leadership pipeline to address these problems. So there's some real issues around leadership in organisations, and of course this is worldwide. Thirdly, 90% of leaders rely on their own ideas rather than seeking involvement from their team. Worse still, 89% of leaders fail to listen or respond to interpersonal cues from those they interact with. Hopefully you're not one of those. Fourthly, disturbingly, only 5% of leaders are effective at building trust in their interactions with team members. 5%. Fifthly, 60% of employees felt their self-esteem dented by their leader at work. So these people would rather do almost anything else than sit through a performance conversation with their boss. Although they did acknowledge that a good boss with excellent interaction skills would enhance their productivity by as much as 60%. The next key point, 79% of employees who quit their job cite a lack of appreciation as a key reason for leaving. So the old adage that people leave managers, they don't leave organisations, I think is true. 65% of North Americans report that they didn't receive any recognition whatsoever in the previous year. So those figures are pretty damning, and I guess what it means is that you and I have got to have more conversations, and our whole job as a leader is to try to instill more conversations in our day-to-day work. We're all busy, but we need to set up some frameworks where we can have more targeted and what I would call developmental conversations with our employees. Here's some pointers around conversations that I think are critically important. I've often said that organisations are conversations, and what I mean by that is an organisation is really a bunch of people working towards a common cause. And during the course of any day, there are hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of conversations going on all the time about all sorts of things. Some of them are short conversations, some of them are long conversations, some of them are meaningful conversations, some of them are pointless conversations, some of them occur in the lunchroom, some of them occur in the boardroom, some of them occur in the corridor. They go on everywhere, including the toilet. We have conversations every day in every way. So that's why I say that organisations are conversations. So really, if we can think about organisations as just a series of conversations that go on. So the question really is, are the conversations meaningful? Are the conversations useful? Do they serve a purpose? Is really the question that we should be asking. So good conversation or good quality conversation perhaps are sadly lacking, because often what happens is we're much more prone to tapping out an email and having a conversation by email than we are sitting down face to face. But the trouble is, email doesn't influence anybody. Email does not increase productivity. Email is good for getting information out quickly to a lot of people at the same time, but it won't influence people, it won't change people, it won't improve performance. So we've got to find the opportunity to have more face-to-face conversations. And if we can't have face-to-face conversations, what we've got to try and do is have conversations via the telephone, because that's the second best way of being able to actually improve performance. But a lot of people will say to me, and I'm sure you've heard this many, many times, that this saying that there is an art of conversation. I don't really think there is an art to conversation. I think the truth of the matter is we're all pretty good at having conversations. And the reason I say that is we have so many every day. We have conversations about all sorts of things. And those conversations, once they're finished, we go on to another conversation. So I'm not convinced that there is a real art form to it. I think there are some conversations that are more difficult than others, undoubtedly. But I think it's a bit of a cop-out to say there's some sort of an art form to having conversations. So I guess it raises the question, have we lost the need for conversations? Have we actually started to use technology instead of actually getting on the phone, ringing people, or going around the corner and talking to people? So if you get nothing else out of, I think, this unit, I'm just hoping that it might urge you to have more conversations with the people that report directly to you. A lot of managers will say to me, I don't have time for conversations, which what they're really implying is that conversations are a waste of time and they get in the way of real work. So what is the real work of a leader? I think the real work of a leader is to have more developmental conversations with direct reports. And if you think that basically your role is to get the best out of people, then it's very hard not to justify having regular developmental conversations with the people that you lead. Two of my favourite authors, Kuzner and Posner, have said in their work, in one of their books at least, that leadership is a relationship. And I agree with them. I think leadership is a relationship. So the question that I have is, how do we actually have relationships? And of course we're talking about working relationships. And the only way that we can really develop working relationships with people, if you think about it, is through conversations. One conversation at a time is the only way that we can build trust up and build up a working relationship. So we can't avoid the need to have developmental conversations in the workplace. So the question is, how do we do it? And of course the question then is, what gets in the way? And I want to look at some of the barriers to having conversations and what gets in the way. In fact, I want to look at 9 barriers of having conversations. I don't doubt that there are many, many other barriers to having conversations, but these are the 9 that I've identified that I think do get in the way, and I want you to have a think about yourself when I go through these barriers, and have a think about whether these barriers impinge on your work. So, barrier number 1. What's barrier number 1? Now these aren't necessarily in any order, but I'm just throwing them out there. Barrier number 1 is inattention during conversations. Sometimes we call this multitasking, where we try and do 2 things at once. We've all seen it. We've probably all done it. You know, you're tapping out an email in your workstation or in your office. You're tapping out and somebody's there at the door or right in front of you. They want to have a word with you, and you say to them, keep going, I'm listening, I've just got to finish this email before I lose my train of thought. So you're of course trying to be very efficient by completing your email and at the same time trying to listen to the concerns of the person that's standing right in front of you. The problem of course is that the email probably isn't the best email you've ever written, And at the same time, the person at the doorway or standing right in front of you knows full well that you're not paying any attention to them. Or more importantly, in their mind at least, is that the email that you're sending is more important than the message that the person is trying to get to you. This is a serious problem. What I strongly suggest you do is you either stop writing out the email and give the person 100% attention, or if the email is so critical, what I strongly recommend that you do is say to the person, let me finish doing this email, I'm almost finished. As soon as I finish this, how about I pop over to you and we can have a chat. That is the most efficient way of doing things, and believe it or not, you'll write a better email and you'll have a better conversation at the end. So that's a significant barrier, trying to multitask. In fact, the science tells us that the brain can't actually concentrate on two things at once. And I know we make jokes about this with males and females, that females are very good at multitasking and males aren't. But you know, the truth is, the research demonstrates that we're all pretty poor at it. So that's one very significant barrier. What's another barrier? Well, another barrier is restricted information channels. I hear people saying this to me all the time. You'll get told on a need-to-know basis. Or if you don't hear from me, it's good news. So these things go on all the time, and what we're really doing is we're restricting the information channels to the people that work for us. And this is not good, because once we do that, then people have to second guess, they have to make assumptions, they often make the wrong assumptions or they guess incorrectly. So what we've got to try and do is open up the information channels. We've got to actually provide people with an opportunity to have the full picture. So I think this is the rule of thumb. If you're in doubt about whether to share information with the people that you lead, then share it. So if you're sort of thinking, should I or shouldn't I think then the rule of thumb says you should. You should share that information. I think it's better to share too much than too little. At the end of the day, you want people to be engaged in their work and have the same perspective that you have. Now, you might say, well, my boss doesn't always keep me informed. And if that's the case, and it could well be, then you need to talk to him or her. You need to ask them, or you need to seek out information from them so that you can share it with your team. So that's a barrier. Third barrier. The third barrier is a lack of feedback. We managers, and the majority of people in this webinar are from Australia, we Australians are very poor at giving feedback. We're just no good at it. Survey after survey demonstrates it. And of course, Module 1, I was really about that. And I'm hoping that you're doing more of that, because every time you give feedback, you're opening up the channels for a conversation with somebody. So you've just got to do it. Good feedback, bad feedback, indifferent feedback, whatever, just give feedback. And that's, I've set homework for you to do that. And I strongly urge you to continue doing that, because you just can't get away from it. You just got to do it. I've got to tell you an interesting story. It's a true story, but this just highlights my point. I remember I was having a conversation with a 19-year-old who just started working in a local government authority. She'd only been there for 6 months, and I asked her how she'd settled in. And she said to me that she really didn't know how she'd settled in. And I said, what do you mean you don't know? And she said, well, my boss hasn't given me any feedback. I might have told you the story in Unit 1, but it's still useful. I said, do you want me to go and talk to your boss about it? And she said, yeah, absolutely. So I did. And I spoke to the boss and I said, look, so-and-so really would like some feedback. She's been here 6 months and she's had none. Can you help? And he looked at me very seriously over his half-moon glasses and he said, I can't do that. I thought, well, there must be a reason. You know, are they having an affair? What's actually going on here? Why couldn't he give her any feedback? And he then said, or I actually asked him, I said, well, do you mind if I ask why you can't? And he said, well, if I give the feedback to her, I'll have to give feedback to everybody, which of course meant I was completely speechless. So feedback is a barrier. Give more feedback. Okay, the next barrier, which is barrier number 4, is you not asking enough questions. We're all very good at answering questions. In fact, if you're a supervisor or a leader or a middle manager or a senior manager, whatever leadership position you're in, you're probably pretty good at answering questions. In fact, your training probably was all around answering questions. And most leaders are very, very good at answering questions. But the truth is, if you're not asking questions, then what's happening is that you're basically not entering into a dialogue. So get curious, ask questions. Why, what, when, who, where, how, and which. If you ask any question that starts with any of those words, you will get more than a one-word answer. So why did you say that? When did it take place? How did it occur? You know, when did it happen? If you're asking those questions, you're entering into a dialogue. And so even though your training has been to answer questions, being a leader, a good leader is not in the business of asking questions. They're in the business, good leader's not in the business of answering questions. A good leader is in the business of asking questions. So ask good questions. And so that's a barrier, not being able to ask questions. Another barrier, which is very significant in the world of work, I see it all the time, is the barrier of too much formality. Often these conversations go on in the boss's office, at the boss's beck and call. Now, you may have an office, and if you do, what I strongly urge you to do is to not have developmental conversations in your office, because it makes people uptight. Get out of the office. Get into neutral territory. Get outside if you can do that. Go to a coffee shop. Just get away from the office because it stifles conversation. And if you don't have an office, great. Just find a private place where you can have a meeting, because formality will stifle the capacity to have a decent conversation. I'm sure you could agree with me on that. And just, I mean, obviously if you're having a disciplinary conversation, a very serious first warning type conversation, then the office is perfectly valid, because it's not going to be pleasant. You need to get through it. You need to go through the motions of it. Then obviously it's fine. But we're talking about everyday, meaningful, developmental conversations. I'm not talking about the disciplinary conversations in this particular unit. Okay, number 6 on the barrier list. Number 6, the barrier is, you guessed it, the over-reliance on email. Now, did you know that the average person spends 2.5 hours a day sifting through emails? So have a think about yourself. You might like to even time yourself and have a think about how much time you actually spend on email. Now, I'm not a Luddite. I'm not against email. I'm all for technology. I'm using it now. I think emails are great. But if you're using emails instead of having a conversation with someone, then no, it's not great. It's a good excuse sometimes not to talk to somebody. So get out of your chair, and if the person is close by, go and talk to them. You'll get more done. you'll have a much more useful interaction. Or get on the phone if they don't happen to be in the office and ring them. You'll find you'll get a better result. So email obviously can be a barrier to having a decent conversation. And as I said earlier on, emails are useless for lifting performance, right? They're not going to lift, and this is what this unit's about. It's about, getting the best out of people. It's not going to happen via email. So you've got to use other forums, and it's phone calls or face-to-face. Okay, moving on now to barrier number 7. Barrier number 7 is a lack of role models. Now, if people in the office are looking at the senior managers, and you may not be one of those, but if your senior managers aren't having conversations with each other and with their direct reports, then that's the cue, and that's where people are going to get their cue from. They're going to say, well, what's the point? If my senior managers aren't having conversations, then I'm not going to. And so if I was going to create a culture of conversation in any organisation, I would be looking very much at the role models in my organisation, because the role models are the senior leaders and what they need to get to do. Excuse me, there's a jet going over the top of my office at the moment, obviously getting ready for the river fire on Saturday night. So apologies about that. I'd be surprised if you can't hear it in the background. Nevertheless, lack of role models is critically important. I know you can't do much about that, but let's be sure that you are a role model in your own right, and it's critically important that you set the right tone and example for the people that you lead. So that becomes a significant barrier. Okay, so what is the next barrier? Well, the next barrier, and it's a very significant barrier, is fear of emotion. Most of us don't have conversations because we're afraid of letting the cat out of the bag or opening a can of worms. So what we do is we suffer in silence and we don't say anything, and that's a significant problem, because it actually makes it worse, because that other person is probably going to let their emotions out somewhere else at some other time. It might be a client or a customer. It could be a colleague. Certainly it could be somebody in the office that really doesn't deserve it. So I would just say to you, have the conversation. And you know what? Most of the time, and I think I said this in Unit 1, most of the time you have a conversation with people, it never ever ends up as bad as you think it will. And this is really important. Often we assume the worst. And if you approach it with courtesy, respect, authenticity, if you do these things the right way, on a lot of occasions the other person will react in a reasonable way. So please don't try and anticipate how somebody's going to interact with you, because quite frankly it's their choice how they interact with you. All you've got to worry about is what you need to do. And those of you that enjoy sport, you're going to watch the footy on the weekend, all these teams need to do in the semi-finals is concentrate on their own game. They can't control the opposition. What the opposition do is up to them, and you hear coaches saying it all the time. All you've got to worry about is your own backyard. So you've just got to concentrate on how you go about your conversation with people and what you say and how you'll say it, when you say it, and where you'll say it. That's all you need to worry about. Don't get upset and concerned with how they might react before the event. It's out of your control, and it's really not worth going there. Okay, and the final one that we need to look at is the office layout. And Again, there's not much you can do about office layout, because the truth of the matter is your office layout is your office layout. You can't really do much about that. So, but let me say a few words about it, which I think are very important. The first thing I'd say about it is that we've moved to an open office plan, and I think that a lot of us working in open office plans have done so because it opens up the communication channels. In other words, people can interrupt you very easily. All they've got to do is turn up at your workstation, and it's almost obligatory for you to down tools and talk to them. So that's a good thing in one way and a bad thing in another, and it really just depends on what it is that they want to talk to you about. So that becomes a significant problem. And what it means is that privacy is a real issue. It means that we have a real problem. You can't obviously broach private or confidential subjects with somebody sitting in an open office environment, which essentially means that you've got to book an office somewhere to have a private conversation. So that becomes a bit of an ordeal, and people think, well, I won't bother. So you can see how the office environment can affect this quite significantly. So there's the 9 barriers, and I'd urge you to have a good think about those 9 barriers and how they affect you in what you do day to day. Okay, what I want to do now is talk about one of the frameworks I want to share with you, and I would urge you perhaps to use this framework or the next framework. So 2 frameworks I'll share with you before we finish up today, and I'd ask you to try these out. They work really, really well. I've had fantastic feedback from all over the world in all sorts of cultures across 21 industries using the 5 conversations framework. So let me explain how this works. The framework consists, as you can see on the left-hand side, with a conversation a month. So you've basically got 5 conversations occurring once a month over a 5-month period, which might sound like a lot, but these conversations are not long. In fact, each conversation should last no more than 10 minutes. And if they do, then that's your choice as the leader, and you may well see the merit in having a longer conversation, and fair enough, good luck to you. But frankly, you don't need to spend more than 10 minutes. It's structured around this. So the first month, the conversation is pretty much a nice, easy conversation around the climate. So with each particular person in your team, it would be a case of sitting down with them and talking to them about 3 things: their job satisfaction, morale in the team, and basically communication channels. So the first question you would ask is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, 1 being low, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? Very simple question. And let's say they say a 6. Doesn't matter what they say, frankly. The next question is important. Either you ask why, so you're getting a handle on how they perceive their current job. Now, why is that important? Well, there's a lot of things that you as a leader can glean from their job satisfaction. There are things that you might be able to do to help them improve their job satisfaction. There will also be things that you can't do anything about. But having a conversation about someone's job satisfaction is a good place to start a conversation. And then you move on to morale. How do you find morale in the team? How do you find morale beyond the team? And communication as well. So if you were prepared to have that conversation with each team member, there would be some things that would come out of that conversation that you could apply to your team very, very quickly, which is a good thing. Now, month 2, you'll notice that it's around strengths and talents. Now, that's good because I don't want to start with what people are not doing right, because all that does is create a downward spiral of negativity. So why don't we start with what people are actually good at? So that's a much more positive place to start. And just imagine if you had to sit down with each of your team member and talk about their strengths and talents. That's not going to be an unpleasant conversation. But why would you do that? Well, it's really about trying to harness strengths and talents in the work that needs to be done. So the whole objective of this conversation is to try, wherever possible, to be able to utilise people's strengths and talents to complete the work that needs to be done. And so that can be a very positive conversation. I would ask the individual team member to come to that conversation with a thought about what their strength and talent might be, one at least. I don't want people sitting there going, oh, I don't know. I really want people to come back conversation thinking about what their strengths are. This is not a place for false modesty. This is a place for people to talk about what they're actually good at in terms of the work that they do. And everybody's got strength and talent, even though it's probably fair to say some of you are thinking, well, yeah, you don't know Fred the way I do or Mary the way I do. I can't think of one possible strength or talent that they've got. Well, they have it. It's just that it needs to be discussed. So it's a great place to start and not a difficult place to start. And the question then turns to how can we utilise that more effectively. The third conversation is around opportunities for growth, which is a slightly more difficult conversation because we're talking about things that people have to improve on. So that conversation is very much around areas to work on. Now, we don't want to look at 25 areas at once, even though you might think that there are 25 areas to work on. There probably are in your head. Let's just concentrate on one area per conversation. So again, asking the team member to come to that conversation with some clarity around something that they can work on and improve. Month 4 is a learning and development conversation, and the argument there is that if you're looking at people's strengths and you're looking at people's opportunities for growth, it's very likely that there will be some opportunities for learning. And I'm not necessarily suggesting sending people off to a TAFE course or an AIM course. That's not necessarily the learning and development I'm talking about. It may well just be coaching them in some capacity, giving them, maybe explaining something to them in a little bit more detail. There are lots and lots of learning opportunities that go on day to day, moment by moment. So just talking about those things, how can I assist? What are some areas that you'd like to learn? Why is that important? How's that going to help you with your current workload and so forth? And the fifth conversation is a conversation around innovation and continuous improvement. This is a conversation about how we might improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the organisation and the team. How can we improve the work that we do? And again, I'm expecting each individual team member to come to that conversation with their own thoughts. So I don't want someone sitting there going, don't know, haven't thought about it, don't really know what can be improved. If that occurred, I would just send them away and say, well, could I ask you please to think about it, and let's again meet next week, and I'd be interested to hear what your ideas are. So I'm not going to let them off the hook. So I preempt them that we're having a conversation around that, and I do that one-on-one. So this is a really good framework that might help you with your development, and part of your homework might be to apply that framework. But the very first thing is to start developing a framework where you can have regular conversations with each person on a fortnightly or at least monthly basis on some of these topics. Okay, so what I want to do now is move on and share with you 5 more conversations that I think you should consider in your day-to-day interactions to help improve, optimize team performance. One of the conversations that I think you should concentrate on is the coaching conversation. Generally speaking, you have more technical skills than the people that you lead, and that's one of the reasons that you're probably in the position that you're in. So spending time having coaching conversations with team members is very important. And you may never have thought of coaching as a conversation before, but it is or should be. So getting the person involved can be a very important conversation. It might go for 5 minutes, it might go for an hour. It just depends on what it is. So get good at having coaching conversations on a regular basis. Another type of conversation that I strongly urge you to consider, and one that I think many people don't have, is the mentoring conversation. So the mentoring conversation is a conversation that's slightly different from a coaching conversation. It can occur where you're sharing your knowledge and experience with other people. And people who've had a great mentor in their career will often talk about it being a life-changing experience. So wherever possible, you know, you can have an opportunity to have a mentoring conversation with people. Another conversation that's critically important, and one that, again, many of us don't seem to indulge in enough, is the delegation conversation. So delegation is a conversation. It's not barking out some instructions or orders to people. It's actually entering into a two-way dialogue. It's not a monologue, it's a dialogue. And we get together with people and actually discuss what needs to be done and spend some time getting it right and delegating. I dare say many of you could be doing more delegation. I have no doubt about that, because I work with lots of managers and lots of industries, and the reality is lots and lots of managers don't delegate enough. So maybe you need to get involved in more delegation and having more of those conversations. Two more conversations that we'll talk about. One of them is a visioning conversation. Now, this is not a motivational conversation. This is a conversation that discusses the why. Why am I asking you to do such and such? Why? So it's giving context to what you're asking people to do. Let me give you an example, very simple example. Let's say that you're working in a production area, and one of the people on the production floor, it's just at the end of the shift, and you walk up to that person and you ask them to sweep the floor before they leave at the end of their shift. Now, that's not a terribly exciting or inspiring task that you're giving the person, and you could leave it at that. But you could also say to that person, well, look, one of the reasons that I'm asking you to do this, and it is important that you do this well, is that at the end of this shift, we've got a prospective customer coming in. They want to have a look at our operations and see how we're operating. And if we can demonstrate to them that we've got a clean, organised production area, it might make all the difference in the world, because this person could potentially be spending millions of dollars with our company on product. And I don't want to miss that opportunity, and I'm sure you don't. So that's why I'm asking you to sweep the floor. Now, that took a couple of minutes, but didn't it make a difference in terms of giving people a context? So I would urge you to do that more so. And I think one of the reasons that we don't do this is very simple. We assume that the other person gets it, which is often not the case, and we also think that it won't make much difference, so why should we bother? But it does make a lot of difference, and people do need to know the why of work. That's the name of a book, by the way, by a fellow by the name of Dave Ulrich, The Why of Work, which is a great title. Now, the final conversation, the final one. Whoop, I went too far. Let me go back one slide. The final conversation, and one that I think, again, we don't have enough of, is the encouraging conversation. We should be encouraging people. We should be letting them know that they can do it, that we have confidence in their capabilities, Because obviously, you know, if you didn't have confidence in people's capabilities, why would you be asking people to do things? So just let people know. Sometimes this can be done in a couple of seconds. Just look them straight in the eye and say, I've got every confidence that you can get this done to your usual high standards. Spin on your heels and get out of there. That is encouraging. It's letting the person know you believe in them. People need that. So there's a framework of 5 that you could also include. So I've basically given you 10 conversations. And what I want you to do is to go out and practice these. But before I finish up, and we may have a few questions, so I just want to finish up on a couple of key points that I think are really critically important when you're actually working with other people. First of all, one of the things that I want to talk about is perceptual positions. It sounds like a very complicated topic. It's not really. It's pretty straightforward, actually. It simply means that when you're in a conversation with somebody else, try to put yourself in their shoes. You've all heard that before. And if you look at first position there on the screen, there you are, it's on the screen now. If you look at it on the screen, you'll notice first position is where you're looking at things through your own eyes. So basically what's happening there is that you are thinking about yourself and your own position. Now when you see two people arguing at each other, voices raised, fingers pointed, they are actually both classically in first position. In other words, they're really just trying to defend their own territory and their own perspective. Now, second position is where you actually try to understand the other person. What are they on about? What's their point of view? What are they trying to say? And I'm not suggesting for a minute that second position means that you agree with them. This is not about what second position is about. Second position is that you at least understand what their perspective is, which is critically important. So at least understanding it without agreeing. Now, that's a superior position. I'm sure you'd agree. There's an even better position than second position, and that's third position. So what's third position? Third position is where not only do you understand their point of view and you're willing to defend your own territory, but you understand the bigger picture. You understand the context of the conversation. You understand how that conversation might fit in to a range of other things that are going on in your workplace. So third position is like what I call the helicopter view. It's like being in a helicopter looking down at a forest. You can see a sea of green, but you can't see the individual trees. So you get a very good overview and perspective about what's happening. Now, that means that you can start to, so for example, if you had to promise something to somebody and you know full well that it can't be done, then obviously you don't promise it, because you're looking at it from a third position perspective and understand it just can't be done. So somebody wants to spend some money on something and quite frankly there's budget cuts and it just can't be done. That's putting yourself into third position, and it really just means for you to raise it with the other person and let them know that it's just not possible. So third position is really where you need to be, and it is the hallmark of somebody that's in an excellent position to have conversations. All right, so folks, one other point that I think is really important is good conversations are about questions. So the critical thing for you is to ask lots and lots and lots of questions. As I said before, why, what, when, who, where, how, and which. If you ask questions that begin with those words, it's obviously precipitating more than a yes or no. And if you just keep quiet after asking a question, you will inevitably get an answer, and then you've got a dialogue happening. So get used to asking lots and lots of questions. It's really the essence, I think, of good conversation. Show me a good conversationalist and I'll show you somebody that's willing to ask more questions than the other person. So to be a good leader means to ask lots and lots of questions. So folks, that brings us pretty much to the end. And what I want to do is, if you've got any questions, can I ask you to type them in? I think we've got one here. Oh, actually, we've got a few. One about the audio. Yeah, I realise the audio is not ideal, and I apologise. It's just, unfortunately, it's one of those days. We've got jets flying overhead and internet problems, so I really apologise about that. As you know, you'll get a recording, and hopefully that recording will be fine, but there's not much I can do about jets flying over and the audio at the moment, so we'll do our best. Another question. Okay. Yeah, one question around how do you get people to talk when they sort of give you the silent treatment in the conversation. You get people to talk by asking questions. So what I suggest you do is just ask them a question and then don't answer it. That's the hard part. Just be silent and just maintain steady eye contact with them if you're face to face with them. And you know what? They will talk. They will talk. But if you answer their question because you're afraid of the silence, then why would they want to talk? Why do they need to talk? There's no issue and no need to talk, so they just keep quiet. So that question is around, ask them a direct question. I'm interested to know, why did you say that? And you'll notice I've got a silence there. It's inevitable that the other person's going to answer that question. All right. So, summing up, and you might have other questions, by all means, you send me an email as you normally do, and I'm more than happy to answer them. So, what have I covered during Module 3 or Unit 3? We've looked at 9 barriers of conversation culture. I've covered those. We've looked at the 5 conversations framework. I've covered those. And we've looked at 5 more developmental conversations, and I've covered those as well. So what's your homework? How are you going to take this forward? So what I'd like you to do is this. I'd like you, if you haven't already done so, is to organise a regular get-together with your direct reports on a fortnightly or monthly basis, and stick to that no matter what. Now you might be thinking, well, I'm just too busy to do that. Let me assure you, if you can arrange to have regular, and remember we're talking fortnightly or monthly, we're not talking every day. If you can arrange to have fortnightly and monthly conversations, 10-minute conversations once a month or once a fortnight, this will make a huge difference. Let me give you a reason why it'll make a difference. Have you thought about this, that people might come up to you and want to discuss certain things with you during the course of a day or week? And quite frankly, it's not something that you need to deal with right there, right now. Could you not say to that person, could we leave this for our normal fortnightly catch-up, and I'd like to have a chat with you about that? Why couldn't you do that? You can. So during these monthly or fortnightly catch-ups, I like to call them, during that time you don't talk about shop, when I say shop, you don't talk about a particular project necessarily, you just open up a dialogue. So that people can talk to you about whatever they want to talk to you about. You can talk to them about whatever you want to talk about. Trust me, you will have plenty to talk about. And you will find that it'll make a huge difference in terms of building your trust level with that particular person. That person will have access to you. And the way I start these conversations is really just saying, what would you like to talk about? I get them to bring to me things that they want to talk about during these catch-ups. And I've given you 2 frameworks. Okay, so you can use the 5 conversations framework or the other framework, the 5 more conversations, each fortnight or month. And I can assure you this will make a big difference. And all you've got to do is, and this is the important thing, is schedule them. If you don't schedule them, you know what? They're not going to happen. And what will happen is busyness will get in the way, and you will just go back to the way you normally operate, which may be around not having conversations. So can I really urge you to schedule these things and stick to it? And if you have to sort of cancel a meeting, then reschedule it. If your direct report has to cancel a meeting, then reschedule it. These things are critically important, and I think you'll find they make a huge difference. So folks, that's the homework. So I'd ask you to give that a really good opportunity to work for you. So again, I apologise for the audio problems and the jets flying overhead and all the rest of it. Hopefully the next time we do this we won't have those sorts of issues. I know that can be frustrating when you're on the receiving end. And just remember, we've got another 3 modules, and when we meet again we will actually have a look at getting the best from people. So I'm going to actually look at motivational strategies there in module 4. We'll then look at understanding people and their personalities, and I've got another diagnostic for you to complete before we meet on Friday, October 28. And our final module is module 6, which is around facilitating effective meetings. So I'm looking forward to continuing the work with you, and thank you very much for your attention, and I'd love to hear your war stories and all the things that are happening. So you've got my email address, so drop me a line and let me know how it's all going. The next thing I'll do is send you I'll send you a recording of this broadcast, and also the slides, so you'll get that in the next 48 hours. So thank you very much, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you.